In the beginning was chaos. When the earth cooled down and life became possible, and with it mankind, human beings began to understand and make use of what the planet was able to provide. And thus it continued for a long, long time. Much later, in their efforts to succeed or simply to survive, men began to build what they called cities. In the name of progress, every day, everywhere, crimes were committed against each coming generation. More and more people realized this, but it was extremely difficult to break the logical patterns of progress. At a certain point, there were families who tried to meet each other far away from the towns and cities. The pleasure of walking, the pleasure of breathing uncontaminated air, of listening to birds and insects, of hearing the wind in the trees. For some, this meant merely a guarantee of peace and tranquility in periods of leisure. For others, it was more a new practical philosophy of life that they sought. Even after the appearance of the tentacular cities, there were cultures that knew that permanently living close to nature was their nature. In the countries of the north, such as Scandinavia, Russia and the Alpine regions, with very cold climates and abundant forest land, there exists a long tradition of houses made of wood. Among these, there are houses which have stood since the 12th century. It was in Poland and Turkey, as far back as the Stone Age, that there appeared the first constructions made of logs, rudimentary saunas and granaries supported on log piles. From simple shelters to permanent buildings, we arrived at the sedentary existence represented by villages and towns. In the forest, everything is pure and healthy. Seeing, touching, feeling, breathing the trees provokes a sense of well-being. Well-being that in a certain way is maintained in log houses. And that sensation of comfort and harmony is no illusion. Wood is one of the most healthy building materials in existence. In the first place, a house made from logs breathes. It absorbs and expels humidity, thus regularizing the indoor atmosphere. By filtering and purifying the air, it contributes to the prevention of rheumatic and respiratory diseases. Secondly, the acoustical properties of wood are universally recognized. It absorbs a significant part of the energy of the sound waves it receives, with a consequent reduction in acoustical pollution. A wooden house is a silent house, which reduces the stress of its occupants. Wood's natural bioelectrical field also engenders a state of equilibrium in the human body. Our metabolism, influenced by the radiation and electromagnetic fields of the earth, can, in a traditional house, suffer the effects of a veritable Faraday's box. But the log house, being permeable to natural radiation, does not distort these subtle fields and thus contributes to our health. The purpose and utilization of the northern wooden houses were and still are today extremely varied. The possibilities of adaptation and flexibility of form of wooden houses knows no limits, making possible large glazed areas, excellent adaptation to the immediate environment, and an enormous variety of textures, shapes and colors, in keeping with traditional vernacular architecture. Wood is compatible with all building materials, to which it adds its specific qualities. In emigrating, the Scandinavians carried with them the tradition of their wooden houses. At the beginning of this century, this culture fell into disuse. However, in our own days, we have witnessed its rebirth, owing to the improved technologies which, while conserving the same system of construction, have brought the additional advantages of industrialization. In fact, in Northern and Central Europe, Japan, Oceania and North America, 80% of the population today live in wooden houses. And these modern homes, in both form and in the requirements of comfort, are in no way distinguishable from the so-called traditional houses, except in the fundamental detail of their being constructed in wood, or rather in wooden logs. If what the peoples of the North seek is the capacity inherent in these houses to keep them warm in wintertime, it is precisely the ability to keep them cool that leads the peoples of the South also to choose them for their homes. In the Iberian Peninsula, Rusticasa is a pioneer in the building of log houses. Wood, as the raw material of rusticasas, has unique qualities which only social habits or prejudice can lead people to ignore. Wood is 4 times more efficient than cement, 6 times more than brick, 15 times more than concrete, 400 times more than steel, and 1,700 times more than aluminium. A wall made of wood 11 centimeters thick is equivalent to a cement wall 30 centimeters thick. For an area of 36 square meters, using cement in place of wood loses you about 13% of usable area. Wood is a material fabricated by nature with a high level of specialization and complexity. Its tubular permits a surprising economy of weight compared to its resistance. This tubular structure has a tensile strength of 1,000 newtons to the square millimeter and a compression strength of 240 newtons to the square millimeter, greater than that of steel and concrete respectively. Buildings made of wooden logs behave extremely well when subjected to earthquakes, owing to their jointed structure through the system of mortising the components. Wood burns at relatively low temperatures. However, the causes of fires are not normally to be found in the structural materials, wood included, but rather in the elements of a decorative nature, surfaces, furniture, although these elements do not suffer from the same mistrust. A test carried out in scientific models allows us to make a closer examination of this question. In the interior, propane gas was used to achieve a constant temperature of around 1,000 degrees centigrade. In the exterior, pieces of cotton were pushed into crevices in the logs in order to see if the gases would be sufficiently hot to burn them. An hour and a half later, it was still perfectly possible to touch the outside of the structure without burning the hand. 20 minutes on, outside the gases generated by the combustion were not sufficiently hot to burn the cotton material. 2 hours after the beginning of the test, the fire was extinguished in order to examine the structure. Only the upper part of the wood burned, but not completely through. When a transversal section is cut, it can be seen that about 2/3 of each log is still intact, allowing the structure to remain standing. In other words, wood, above all as a structural material, when attacked by fire, has exceptional advantages. In the case of fire, the superficial carbonization, apart from hampering the escape of the gases, which as it happens are not toxic, also hinders the penetration of heat through its having a thermic conductivity factor less than that of the wood itself. The fire therefore takes much longer to spread. Many structural materials are non-combustible. However, none is proof against fire. In a fire, metallic structures expand and become distorted, their mechanical resistance decreasing very rapidly with the rise in temperature. In the same situation, reinforced concrete breaks up. In the case of wood, because of its extremely low coefficient of thermal expansion, there is no fear of dangerous distortions or collapse. Thus precious time is gained for evacuating the building. The energy needed to fabricate wood is nil. The tree uses solar energy. Further, the consumption of energy for its transformation is 6.3 times less than for steel and 39.5 times less than for aluminium. Of all the building materials, wood is the only one that is natural and renewable. The wooden house is born in the forest, that lung of the earth which generates oxygen, absorbs carbon dioxide and reduces the greenhouse effect. The ecology and the safeguarding of the environment today preoccupies a growing percentage of people. But contrary to what is claimed by some radical ecologists, the forest needs to be maintained and trees felled in an ordered and rational way in order that its natural cycle can continue. In neglected forests, the trees die old, victims of mutual competition, of attacks by parasites, and then they decompose. The forest stops producing oxygen, thus altering its ecological role. It's necessary to keep the forest in an active state. In a properly maintained forest, there is a constant or increasing rate of production, and its total volume does not diminish. The principle is, only cut down that volume of wood which the forest produces in a year. In many countries in the Northern Hemisphere, the forest mass increased when programs and plans for its proper exploitation were established. Today, North American territory has 75% more forest land than existed at the time when Columbus discovered the American continent. Once its life cycle is completed, wood is recycled and given new value as fertilizer or calorific energy without contaminating the environment. That part not suited to its incorporation in the productive processes, such as the bark, is also made use of as energy. Thus it is that one can speak of the integral utilization of wood. The increase in yield as a result of improved genetics will help to guarantee the availability of wood for future generations. The wood industry is the industry with the highest interest in conserving and improving the forests, because these constitute the source for providing the raw material with which it works. The new technologies permit fabrication processes in which are incorporated the most sophisticated controls for guaranteeing quality in all their phases, while at the same time avoiding any deterioration in the environment. Although at the outset standardized solutions exist, the future occupant will always be able to redesign his house. Each house is an ongoing case. Contrary to a prefabricated building, whose principle is based on the utilization of pre-fashioned panels, log houses use solid elements, which are subsequently erected on the construction site. heart of Gerês, one of the most beautiful regions in Portugal, it is possible to enjoy nature to the full. It's in the midst of this quiet, this peace, that we watch the assembling of a Rusticasa. After the base is constructed, the position where the walls will be placed is marked. Before putting the base logs for the walls in position, asphaltic felt is spread in order to protect the wall from rising damp. After securing the base logs comes the erecting of the walls. The remaining logs are mortised with millimetric precision, ensuring perfect waterproof joints. These buildings can be constructed from different types of wood, and the logs can have different profiles. In this case, Japanese cedar is being employed with a thickness of 110 millimeters. The modules are milled with double grooves and tongues. Each house is unique. Stone and other building materials are easily integrated into a house constructed from logs. Despite the utilization of an obviously industrialized method, some craftsmanship processes are necessary, particularly with regard to the structure of the roof. This requires a high level of specialization. Every house can have its fireplace in whatever form is required. Rusticasa buildings can have different types of roof: sodgrass, slate, tile, among others. The high efficiency of heat insulation of the logs is reinforced with the application of a layer of mineral wool, upon which is applied asphaltic felt in order to prevent moisture penetration. The framework is equipped with double glazing with a sealing system, which guarantees a perfectly hermetical join. After the work on the exterior is completed, the floors are laid. This flooring can be varied. In the case of the ground floor, heat insulation is added. Just as in conventional buildings, electrical installation can be embedded. The plumbing is also done in the same way as in conventional constructions. The finishings deserve special attention. A so-called normal Rusticasa house takes only 12 weeks from start to finish. Only in cases of special complexity in conception or access could it take slightly longer.
Tem as comodidades todas, talvez acrescidas de uma casa normal. A gente optou por este tipo de construção. Deram-nos garantias, fomos ver várias antes de construir esta e acho que fizemos uma boa opção.
Uma das razões fundamentais realmente é por se tratar de uma casa bastante saudável. De uma forma muito simples, consegue ser reunida condições térmicas excelentes, que é o que não se consegue reunir noutro tipo de construção.
Nuestra experiencia para vivir en una casa de madera es muy positiva. Es fresca en verano, muy caliente en el invierno, súper acogedora y sobre todo muy ecológica. El mantenimiento es facilísimo, lo hacemos nosotros solos y no supone un gasto mayor que el de cualquier otra casa. Hay que tener en cuenta que esta casa, cuando se hizo, ya estaban los jardines. La casa vino después y en ningún momento los jardines han sufrido ningún tipo de daño.
The pleasure of walking, the pleasure of breathing uncontaminated air, of listening to the birds and the insects, of hearing the wind in the trees. This great planet of ours is getting smaller and smaller. A day will come when even here the pleasure of relaxing in a log chalet will be substituted by the desire to live in a home like this, with the quality, the comfort, the durability and the superior appearance that distinguish it.